Some of these players I like, but it's hard not to pretend like they didn't fall down rankings after week 2. So we're going to go through the top 11 fallers, and I'm actually going to give you our updated ranking for each player. Naji Harris is now RB24, which is actually where he was last week. That's why he's down here at 11 in terms of the fallers. But essentially what we had with Pittsburgh is, yep, they showed us this is going to be a 50-50 split backfields. After week 1, Naji was definitely the clear back, but Jaylen Warren was coming back from the hamstring, so a lot of people said, oh, okay, Naji, don't buy into it, sell him high. Looks like that is the right call here, because if you're looking at what happened in week 2, you had 31 snaps played from Jaylen Warren, 31 snaps played from Naji Harris. And what's very concerning is if you were looking at the targets out of this backfield, Naji Harris just effectively has no receiving role whatsoever. Naji Harris through the first 2 weeks has a total of 4 targets, 2 receptions for 14 receiving yards. Now, this is naturally what you're going to expect with Justin Fields under center, where with Fields, since he can run the ball himself, naturally those rushing quarterbacks are going to have a lower check down rate overall. And we know with Fields, it's probably not going to be a great offense, right? So, I mean, maybe Fields is better for the Steelers. I think Russell Wilson would be better for the assets here in fantasy. But yeah, I think Naji is kind of like a borderline flex play at this point. Probably not somebody that I'm super excited to get in. Now, going over to another running back, I think Chase Brown has to continue to fall down rankings. I actually just moved Chase Brown down to the RB40. I have him directly behind Austin Eckler, Ezekiel Elliott, directly ahead of Tajee Spears and Zamir White. And the thing with Chase Brown is, now we see back-to-back games, 100%, he is nowhere close to being a startable option outside of a potential Zach Moss injury. Now, I am going to prefer Chase Brown over the pure handcuff backs, the guys that we know for 100% fact aren't going to be viable unless the starter were good down in front of him. A player like Tyler Algier is someone who I just picked up off the waiver wire myself this week. And the reason why I would rather have Chase Brown is I do believe that Zach Moss isn't some top-end talent, right? I do even want to say that from what I saw in this game, Chase Brown looked like the more electric back. Chase Brown looked like he had a little more juice. So I think that there's a non-0% chance that Chase Brown does expand his role as the season goes on, and maybe he can become viable even without a Zach Moss injury, but it looks like that is far, far from happening, where Zach Moss played 51 snaps this week in comparison to Chase Brown at 13, and where Chase Brown through the first 2 weeks has only touched the ball a total of 10 times. Now going over to the 9th biggest faller, oh my gosh, how's Rashad White down here? Rashad White is a bigger faller than this, to be honest. With White, you've had 25 carries this year, and those 25 carries have given Rashad White a whopping 49 rushing yards. Yes, Rashad White is averaging fewer than 2 yards per carry. We saw this past week that the receiving usage wasn't even able to save Rashad White. This is back-to-back weeks now where Bucky Irving has actually been the leading rusher for this offense, and this is back-to-back weeks where Bucky Irving has been the more efficient back getting on the field with every single touch he has. So if I'm looking at this, I think Rashad White in a full PPR format maybe is still viable. He is averaging 3.5 targets for the first 2 weeks, but there is a very real threat that Bucky Irving at one point does take over this starting job. Now, specifically because Rashad White can still catch the football, I have him at RB16. I still have him ahead of James Conner. I still have him ahead of Ramondre Stevenson. Reason being is I think, 1, the Bucs offense is going to be much better than what you have in New England. And 2, in the case of James Conner, I think you also have to potentially be worried about Trey Benson later in the season expanding his own role. And I say that as somebody who has James Conner as his RB1 in the Flock League, so I really hope it's not true. But yeah, I mean, at this point, not trending well for Rashad White, even though the offense looks to be great in Tampa. Now, going over to our next guy, a player that I do have in the Flock League, Sam Laporta officially falls down from being my tight end 1 overall. I had Laporta at tight end 1, Kelsey at tight end 2 coming into the season. Very hard not to put Trey McBride at tight end 1 at this point. And with Sam Laporta, we are another dud week away from him falling even further. What is so disappointing as somebody who is very high on Laporta this year is in this game, you have 55 pass attempts for Jared Goff. 55 pass attempts for Jared Goff equates to three targets for Sam Laporta. The man has less than a 6% target share in Detroit. The week prior, Going into overtime with the Rams, you have 5 targets for Laporta, 45 receiving yards. This is somebody coming off the best rookie tight end season that we have ever seen. This has been, a high volume passing attack, while obviously the points haven't necessarily been there in Detroit. You still have the volume in this offense. I don't know. We are another bad week away from me having no other option but to put Brock Bowers ahead of him, which is just absolutely crazy because I should have just been smart enough. And of course I'm not, but I would have hoped that I was smart enough to just take Bowers instead of Laporta when he was going at a much cheaper cost as well this year. Now let's go over to somebody else that I have in the Flock League. RIP, Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin here is just in a horrible situation where right now Jaden Daniels is averaging 5.2 intended air yards per pass attempt, which is the lowest mark in the NFL through the first 2 weeks. The passing volume's not there. What you are seeing with Daniels is dink and dunk, dink and dunk, dink and dunk, and run the ball. Right now, the leading receiver here in Washington is freaking Zach Ertz. Austin Eckler, Brian Robinson seeing a considerable amount of target volume in back-to-back weeks. And if you look at Terry McLaurin, he had 8 targets this week. He had 6 receptions. And what we've come to know of McLaurin in the past is, 6 receptions. What, is he coming away with 80 receiving yards, 22 receiving yards. Week 1, 17 receiving yards. I think it may get better for McLaurin going into the future. I have him wide receiver 38 because he's still seeing the volume. But another down week, and honestly, this is an L that I have to take. I have to move McLaurin behind Jameson Williams right this second. There's no reason why McLaurin should be ahead of him. So next time you go to flockfantasy.com, I promise you Jameson's going to be higher than this. And McLaurin may even fall behind Ladd McConkey at the same time. Now moving over to our next wide receiver. Thank God I traded him off my team in the Flock League. Amari Cooper is somebody else that has just been laughably inefficient. Now you can blame this on the quarterback play that you have here in Cleveland. And I know a lot of people think that if Jameis were to step in, that this would be a better situation overall. But I don't necessarily know if you can just say that for 100% certainty. Amari Cooper has 17 targets this year. And off of those 17 targets, he has 5 receptions. Off of those 5 receptions, Amari Cooper has 27 total receiving yards. This is a very similar situation what we were just talking about with Terry McLaurin, in that this is a dink and dunk offense. This is an offense that's not throwing the ball deep downfield. This is an offense that's keeping everything across the line of scrimmage. And there's just no way that you can start Amari Cooper. There's no way that you can start Terry McLaurin anytime soon. Unless if you play in a 12-team league with multiple flex spots and it's a full PPR format, then maybe you can slide one of them into your starting lineup. But I don't know. I personally would not be excited about it at all. But something I am very excited about is actually seeing the Underdog promos that are dropping this week, where you have a CeeDee Lamb special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard for all users. And if you are new to Underdog Fantasy with code FLOCK, you are going to get an additional Aaron Rodgers special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard for Thursday night. And yeah, if you use code FLOCK, you're also going to get a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. With code FLOCK, you will also get hooked up with a free team review through flockfantasy.com as well. So make sure you take advantage of that with the link in the description and the comment section. But let's move over to our next player. Somebody that was, the number one guy moving up rankings last week, and maybe we got a little too excited. Isaiah Likeley sees a massive step backwards. So after seeing week 1, where Isaiah Likeley looks like the best player on the field, not named Lamar Jackson, for this Ravens offense, my assumption is, we're going to get a lot of 12 personnel. We're going to get a lot of 2 tight end sets. Isaiah Likeley is going to be running a route on maybe 75% of Lamar Jackson dropbacks. And what you get instead is you get 32 out of 65 potential snaps for Isaiah Likeley this week. You get Isaiah Likeley with 18 routes run out of a potential 37. Likely has less than a 50% route participation rate. You go from 12 targets, 111 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown, to a game where he has 26 receiving yards, and we're lucky to get it. I had to move Likely back down behind Ferguson and David Njoku. I moved Likely ahead of these guys with their respective injuries, but now that Ferguson and Njoku are another week closer to returning, And at the same time, Likeley doesn't look like somebody that you really want to play outside of an injury to your tight end position. I think I'd rather have Ferguson and Njoku for the long term. Now, moving over to a wide receiver that the question now becomes, can you go ahead and cut him? Courtland Sutton is the fourth largest faller this week. Courtland Sutton is now down to my wide receiver 49, directly behind Christian Kirk, Jerry Jeudy, and directly ahead of Quentin Johnson, DeAndre Hopkins. The question with this range of receivers isn't, do I start them this week? The question is, are they worth the roster spot, depending on your league settings? With Sutton, it's not a usage issue. He runs 37 out of potential 39 routes this week. You go back to week 1, and yeah, Sutton is out there for every snap. He's running every single route. The issue is solely on the back of Bo Nix, where Bo Nix this week, off of 35 pass attempts, gives you a QBR of 32.4. We have 0 touchdowns, multiple interceptions. This is resulting in Sutton so far this year having 64 total receiving yards. There's just no upside here in this Denver Broncos offense. I have Javonte, and Javonte does look like the lead back here, seeing, 11 carries in this backfield, also seeing 5 receptions as well, 16 opportunities. I love it. But if you are a Denver Bronco right now, there's just simply no way that you can touch a starting lineup. Now, going over to the Seahawks, somebody that actually did move down a ton of my rankings this week is Tyler Lockett. Similar to Sutton, the question now no longer is, can we start him? And instead it's, is he worth the roster spot? Tyler Lockett's behind DeAndre Hopkins, Shaheed in our rankings, directly ahead of Gabe Davis and Brandon Cooks, where if you were seeing the concentration of targets with the full-blown Jackson Smith-Njigba breakout here in Seattle, you have DK Metcalf and JSN accounting for 30 targets out of 44 potential pass attempts. I thought Tyler Lockett got hurt in this game, but you see, Tyler Lockett played 57 snaps. He just drew 2 targets. Tyler Lockett looks like he is easily taking the backseat to JSN at this point. This isn't a super high volume passing attack like the Houston Texans, where we can say, okay, yeah, you can start 3 receivers from here. There's no way in hell you can do that in Seattle. So yeah, Lockett, it goes from, is he a borderline flex to is he worth that roster spot? Christian Kirk goes from, I'm pretty sure I'm starting the guy coming into the year, where I'm all of a sudden worried if he is worth that roster spot, because this was the perfect setup for him. If you were looking at Christian Kirk, you had no Evan Ingram in this game. No Evan Ingram, I felt that meant, okay, Kirk's going to get utilized a little bit more, especially over the middle of the field. We know Brian Thomas Jr. is more so the vertical deep element of this offense. Same thing, Gabe Davis is that burner. Maybe Christian Kirk is getting the dump offs underneath. Well, Christian Kirk does run 32 out of 36 potential routes, and Christian Kirk comes away with a whopping, drum roll please, -1 receiving yards. 1 reception. Now through the season, Christian Kirk is sitting with 29 receiving yards and 2 receptions through the first 2 weeks, being an every down player in this Jags offense. The issue with Kirk that I had, which is why I didn't draft him coming into the year, is I didn't see the upside. I thought that there was no real upside for a breakout to happen for a receiver that was drafted way back in 2018, where they add in Brian Thomas Jr. in round 1. But I thought his floor was higher than this. I thought he had like a wide receiver 4 floor and a wide receiver 3 ceiling. And it looks like the wide receiver 4 is maybe his ceiling at this point. So I've dropped Christian Kirk all the way down to 47 in my wide receiver rankings, directly behind Christian Watson and Jordan Addison, and directly ahead of Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton. Now, the number 1 faller in these rankings is not necessarily the player that's the least valuable, but it's a player that goes from being a must-start option every week to now I can't put him in my lineup. It's Jerome Ford. With Jerome Ford, week 1, he was the true 3-down bell cow here in Cleveland. He played pretty much every single snap. He saw pretty much every single touch. Where here, you actually get a Pierre Strong injury, which you would think, okay, maybe this means Ford is even better. No. Deonta Foreman plays 27 snaps here. Foreman has 14 carries in comparison to Jerome Ford at 7. Foreman has, some usage as a receiver as well. If you look at this data from PFF, Foreman runs 8 routes out of this backfield in comparison to Jerome Ford at 15. So with Ford, the reason he was a sell high candidate for me last week was the shelf life of him as that 3-down player was certainly limited. And he's not the talent where you can start him if he's in a committee. No, if you're starting Jerome Ford, he has to be the feature back. It's a bad offense. He's now a committee back. He drops down to RB 35 in my rankings behind Javonte, Singletary, Mostert, and right ahead of Benson, Charbonnet, and Eckler. And honestly, we get another week of this kind of Deonta Foreman usage and another week closer to Nick Chubb returning. Ford could even fall a little bit further. But I think that's all I have for you. Of course, hit that like button, subscribe if you play fantasy football. And if you want to go check out any of those pick'ems for Thursday, you can find that link in the description and the comment section. Code FLOCK is going to get you hooked up with a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000, plus an Aaron Rodgers and CeeDee Lamb special pick'ems, more than less than half a total yard. And on top of that, you're going to be getting a free team review through flockfantasy.com in one of our live streams. Just make sure you set up your flockfantasy.com account with the same email address that you set up on Underdog and made that $10 deposit on Underdog. But thank you again. I really do appreciate you. I really hope you have a great day and really hope we get to see you out in the live stream later tonight.